We took the rise of the internet very seriously. It's true. And the generation ahead of me, the Gen X friars, when we had our first provincial website, they took very seriously the writing that was done on there. So I remember following the blog back when I was in college, kind of starting to sniff around about this Dominican stuff, and I took what they were writing on the blog very seriously back when blogging was a thing.
Yep.
And then as content and as context has changed, we've adapted and looked to meet people where they are. And right now people are on YouTube, so we'll go there too.
Welcome back to For Pete's Sake, a Vatican podcast offering you a front seat view into Catholic life in and around the Vatican. I'm your host, James Riley, and I'm joined today by Father Patrick Mary Brisco. Father Brisco is no stranger to the podcast world. He is one of the hosts of Godplaining, the popular Catholic podcast run by the Dominican friars from the province of St. Joseph. He currently lives in Rome, where he serves as the Promoter General for Social Communication for the Orders of Preachers. Father Brisco, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me on, James.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. To start, of course, you're in Rome. You've been here for several months now, since fall, is that right?
Right, that's true.
Yeah.
The friars that I live with would take issue with your first claim that you're in Rome. So I keep a heavy travel schedule. So they always say, like, where do you even live? Do you live here?
You're dipping in and out of Rome.
That's right.
Yeah.
One said the other day we were at dinner and someone asked, "Now when did you move here?" And he said, "Whoa! Father Patrick hasn't moved here. He keeps a room here."
Right.
It's a little unfair. No, so I started the role in September. That's when I set up shop at Santa Sabina.
Yeah.
And then I went for Italian studies in Milan, just so I could torment the Romans with a terrible accent.
Yeah.
And they're very grateful for that. They appreciate it sincerely, I think. And
it's a way of earning graces.
And then I would really say it was January where things were off and running.
Yeah.
For me, as far as the rhythms of the role and Roman living.
Okay. What does that role actually entail? Because I've never heard of social communications, first of all. But then a promoter. They're just making up titles at this point.
It's great. It sounds excellent in Latin, and I'm not just a promoter. I'm a general promoter.
Right.
I'm usually pretty cool about it. I don't make people salute. You're welcome to if you like.
No,
but
of course, we'll give you the 21 gun salute as you're leaving.
It's not necessary. No, it's part of the way that the Holy See wisely entered the media landscape after the Second Vatican Council and Inter Mirifica was by talking broadly about media. So rather than get pinned down to radio or TV, so they use phrases like social communications, meaning every possible means of digital or other media communications. So
it's not like social justice, social communication sort of thing.
Exactly.
It's society at large in terms of communication.
I think that's part of the idea.
Okay.
And from my perspective and from what I do in the order is I try and build up within the order a greater understanding of our day-to-day events to connect our members, friars, sisters, and laity alike to the master, to his person, and then to harness and develop our messaging so that those who are not yet involved with the order and who might want to be would be more interested in our projects. And what do I mean by that? I'm particularly interested in talking to young men who would want to become friars, or young women who would want to become sisters, and benefactors who want to support our works. We've seen a lot of development on a number of projects here in Rome lately, including an extraordinary renovation of San Clemente. A restoration is a better word.
Yeah.
And developments at the Angelicum, which include a physical plant restoration, but also major investments in the work of educating friars from all over the world that happens there, and not just friars, but sisters, and training seminarians and laity, again, from all over the world.
Yeah, well, I know with the Angelicum, you've got a couple great alumni there too, JP2, and of course Pope Leo now too was there as well.
Yeah, I mean, our fun fact is 50% of the last 4 Roman pontiffs have their doctorates from the Angelicum.
Huge, yeah. They're flocking in at this point. Within the Dominican order, you're from the province of St. Joseph specifically. For the Promoter General of Social Communications, how does that role work? Do they usually have someone coming in every 4 or 5 years? Is it kind of a revolving position, or are you kind of in for 10, 20 years? Is it a long-term role?
It's a position that changes, so all the positions on our general council operate around a fundamental 6-year mandate.
Okay.
That's kind of the base. I say fundamental because that's the base.
Okay.
It is
Yeah.
often extended, as we are.
As in, like, it'll be another 6 years if
we
it's
are
extended?
gently reminded. No, so sort of on a year-by-year basis.
Okay.
Like, for example, the Procurator General of the Order, who's our head canonist internally, he recently concluded his tenure. He was Procurator General for about 10 years.
Okay.
So for us, thinking that's a more extreme scenario, 6 to 10 years. And the idea being that these positions should be representative.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be held by particular friars so long that the position begins to reflect that particular friar.
Right.
So that's part of the idea. And another thing that's interesting about the way our order is governed, and this is different from other religious orders, the General Council does not turn over at the same time. Those appointments are staggered.
Okay.
So when a new master of the order is elected, he serves for a 9-year term. When a new master of the order is elected, he inherits the council of his predecessor and only begins to replace friars as their mandates expire, typically.
Okay.
Now, he could do something otherwise, but internally that would be viewed as a very particular decision.
But it's not like there's a whole new administration, for lack of better terms, coming in. It's not like he's making appointments as soon as he comes in.
No,
Okay.
exactly. But whereas other religious orders do operate that way, or they have a different approach to service on the General Council. So that's the way we handle it. And with respect to my own role, I'm succeeding a Peruvian, which is kind of fun when you think of Pope Leo.
Totally.
But he was, of course, very influential within Spanish media, and his predecessor, Father Alex Salabir, was from Paris, so a Frenchman. Our 3 languages of the order are English, French, and Spanish. And I think within communications especially, there's a desire to retain sensitivities to those particular language groups.
Yeah, why French? Is that because you guys have historically deep roots in France?
Certainly that's part of it, but also because of the expansion of the order. So in more recent times, right, the order is very strong in Vietnam, and during the colonial period, many Vietnamese spoke French, and that's less true today, of course. And then also because of the colonial period, the order's growth in Africa led to many French-speaking members. And we also have the historical memory of maybe 100 years ago where French was absolutely the world's diplomatic language. And so it was a very effective means for friars to communicate. Leadership of the order at the time was French. So don't bring it up to the Italians.
Yeah.
They get sensitive about this.
Good to know. We were trying to actually get this episode last week, but you had to postpone because you had a meeting with the Curia, you said. Is that, as general promoter for social communications, are you meeting with the Vatican a lot? Is that a monthly sort of thing?
So this one was very vague, and I meant internal. So that was just among ourselves. We had a few situations that were evolving. They weren't very interesting, and this sort of thing doesn't happen that often. It sounds much more mysterious. But certainly, in my own posture towards the role, I'm very interested in assisting the Holy See in any way I can. So I began to train, for example, in being a Vatican commentator to follow the official events on YouTube. Just my own little way of supporting Devin Watkins over there at Vatican Media. Because, of course, in my role within the order, my job is to serve institutional communications, just like those efforts of the Holy See.
Okay, very nice. Well, taking it back, you're a Dominican friar. What is your vocation story, and what led you to the Dominicans?
I was a seminary dropout. No, not well. Actually, I guess that is true. I've never said it that way, but that is true. That is true.
The truth comes to light.
Yeah, that is true. No, I had for a long time, since I was a young boy, thought of being a priest, and thought of it very seriously. And I think every young Catholic boy should have thoughts about the priesthood. It should be encouraged.
Right.
And meaning they should be encouraged to consider it and to understand a priestly vocation as a beautiful thing.
Right.
So that was the case. We had great priests in my home parish. They were around.
And this is Fort Wayne, Indiana?
This is Fort Wayne, Indiana, where I grew up. And so from a young age, I thought seriously about going from high school directly to college seminary. And then I got cold feet. And that was actually a very important moment for me because I proceeded then to go to Hanover College for 1 year. Hanover is marvelous little school in southern Indiana, but it's not a Catholic school.
Okay.
And I spent all of my time talking to everyone there who would listen about politics and religion. And I realized one of those things is a lot more important than the other.
Yeah.
And it confirmed for me, the Lord used all of that to confirm for me the invitation to consider my discernment of the priesthood. So I applied for seminary for my home diocese, was accepted, transferred in college as a sophomore to Immaculate Heart of Mary Seminary, which is at St. Mary's University in Winona, Minnesota, where I had a fantastic experience. Great formators, wonderful classmates. And then during my second year there, my junior year, was just very restless and discontinued formation, but stayed at the university to finish my degree. And in that time, I grew very close to a Dominican friar who was a philosophy professor on the faculty and one of the seminary faculty members. Okay. And I realized that part of my hesitation and part of my own discomfort, maybe, or with the priestly vocation was because I was really looking for religious life, but I didn't have a way to distinguish those two because all I had ever known were these marvelous diocesan priests. They were fantastic.
Yeah. But you thought priesthood and you think that.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I didn't know. And it was only by coming to know this Dominican that I understood more about religious life. And not only that, but I understood, wow, really, the Dominican life is it. This summer, we were, some of us from the podcast I host, Godplaining, some of us were presenting during the Jubilee for Youth, and we were giving a talk in front of the bodies of Catherine of Siena and Pier Giorgio Frassati here in Rome at Santa Maria Sopra Minerva, the packed basilica, hundreds of young people. And I did the very respectable and noble thing of just breaking down in tears in front of them. Because at the end of our time, I was making an appeal to them, consider your life and what it's going to mean, and consider joining the order. Become a Dominican. There's no reason not to. And I was so moved in the course of this appeal, because all I could think of was, without the order, and here in this historic church in Santa Maria Sopra Minerva, where I was speaking in front of the presence of the bodies of two very great saints, right? Yeah. All I could think of was just how precious the order is and how extraordinary the grace that was given to St. Dominic is. And I realized that I couldn't understand myself anymore without that. And I think that's what a vocation is, right? You come to understand yourself as a married person. You understand yourself because of and through your spouse. And that's true for me as a Dominican priest. I can't understand myself without the Dominican order.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's interesting because you have even the different orders, but I think it's important, like you're saying, with even discerning something like the priesthood, where I think having specific spiritual charisms are really important too. I think it's beautiful, even for lay people. So you also have Pier Giorgio Frassati, who is a layman, but was he Third Order Dominican?
Yes, exactly. Part of our Dominican laity.
Yeah. So I think even having for people to have this sense of this richness of the faith, where there is, even within the home of the church, there's these places that actually bring out in a particular way your Christian vocation. I've always found that beautiful. For me, I feel like the Dominicans are definitely one of the most present in terms of people. I think when they think of friars, they think of Dominicans. So, I mean, you're social communications, but it seems like you guys have done very well on PR strategy too. In terms
we've got great branding. No, it's true. We pack a punch. I was talking about this with another friar recently, and we were just going through the numbers, kind of chuckling to ourselves, because we are not significant in terms of the number of religious we have globally. So you consider the Capuchins, for example, or the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. They have many thousands, multiples of thousands more members than we have. We're about 5,000 friars worldwide, about another 1,000 in formation, right? So
wouldn't know that though. I just said.
So if you really squint, we're talking about 6,000, whereas the Society of Jesus has about 20. The Capuchins have about 20. If you add all the Franciscans up, I mean, I guess only God knows, but still, you've got a lot. You've got a lot more. The Salesians, very expansive, and I think to your point. This isn't just about branding, although I think our black and white is pretty strong, and we managed to be in the right place at the right time at a lot of moments in church history because of the nobility of our saints. But I think it has to do with the grace given to the founder, the Dominic's call to preach for the salvation of souls, to speak truth in difficult moments.
Yeah.
That the church always needs this, and through the rigorous formation the friars receive, especially through the theology of St. Thomas Aquinas, that gives us a particular adaptability
Totally.
and a strength to meet the needs of the day.
Yeah. And it seems appropriate that you guys would be at the forefront of communications as the order of preachers, because historically it would have been to, combat heresy.
Well, we're trying. There aren't
but-
that many. I keep saying to the master, Father, I need like 12 interns here. Let's
Yeah.
get brothers from all over the world.
Right.
And it hasn't happened yet, but I do say it to him. So
Right.
we live in hope, that maybe we will arrive at the forefront of
Right.
communication.
Well, at least in the States, though, like for Catholic orders, religious orders, that is, you guys have put up a great.
No, we
I
didn't.
think platform.
We took the rise of the internet very seriously. It's true. And the generation ahead of me, the Gen X friars, when we had our first provincial website, they took very seriously the writing that was done on there. So I remember following the blog back when I was in college, kind of starting to sniff around about this Dominican stuff, and I took what they were writing on the blog very seriously back when blogging was a thing.
Yep.
And then as content and as context has changed, we've adapted and looked to meet people where they are. And right now people are on YouTube, so we'll go there too.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Godplaining then. When did you start that? When did that come about within the Dominican order? Because it's you and a couple other friars.
Yes, that's
who run
right.
that.
So it's myself and 3 other friar hosts. We're a team. Father Joseph Anthony Kress, Father Bonaventure Chapman, and Father Gregory Pine.
Yeah.
Father Gregory's by far the best known of all of us. He's a tremendous intellect and a great friend, which is really the occasion of the podcast. So all of us are classmates. We joined the order together in 2010, which when you join a religious order together, you enter the most rigorous year of your religious life, which is the novitiate. Some orders of postulancy. For us, it's a novitiate.
Yeah.
And that binds you together in a very important way. So when we talk about classmates, we're talking about guys we've been through a lot together.
Through spiritual Dominican boot camp.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. When you have a Boston Irishman, as your novice master, there's a way that he brings all of you together and forges you. Our novice master is a great man, and that was a very great year. And very important because it forged our friendships. And that's what the heart of the podcast is that it's 4 friars who we were spread out in our first assignments. We weren't living together at the time. And we said, well, we're white guys, almost 30. We should have a podcast. So
Let's fulfill the stereotype.
It was basically required.
Right.
Pretty soon the U.S. government
We're
was
Dominicans, so there's a twist.
the government was going to be honest that we didn't have one. It was sort of required. But we had the urge, of course, from the charism, from a desire to preach, to do something. And in our different assignments, we said, well, what would this look like? We did a little research, and we started the project from those different places, and it's evolved since then. So now we have a studio in DC. We record quarterly. We have a bunch of different guests. We do all kinds of additional content. Lives especially are fun. And from the beginning, I'll add this too, James, because I think this is important and worth mentioning. We didn't want our project to be just an online thing. So within the first year that we started the podcast, we invited listeners to join us on a retreat. And so in addition to the podcast, we host a number of in-person events throughout the year. Basically, every time we can, we get together for these one-day days of recollection or for overnight retreats. We do one that we call our all-comers retreat, which is for adults of any age, and our young adult retreat. Some of those events this last year have been especially successful and joyful. When we start talking about numbers and church things, that always is a bit tough for me because, we could be very American about these things, and we have to be careful what we mean by successful, because success isn't just a great crowd, right?
Right.
But in Boston, we had 265 registrations for a day of recollection.
Wow.
A massive event. So it was a really wonderful, joyful day.
That was a one-time thing, or
just a one-day event held at a parish just outside the city, and people came from all over the area, and it was, well, as the kids would say, the vibes were immaculate. It was a special day. It was really lovely.
You're on social media when you're Your mind's going to the Gen Z slang. That's great.
I've done my training. You know?
Right. Yeah. Within the Godplaining Friars, what's your role? But then, what's the role of the other three of you guys? Like, do you guys have like mom and dad in the group? Or?
Well, so Father Gregory takes on a lot of the administrative work as well.
Okay.
So he's got this whole like, oh, I'm just kind of fun. We're just kind of hanging out personality. But he is an awesome administrator. He is so on top of things, and the project would not have grown if it weren't for his business instincts and his attentional and attentive leadership. So undoubtedly, you know, he's leading the project as well. And it's really great because he allows the rest of us to just join him for the ride.
Was it his idea originally?
No, we kind of had it simultaneously, actually, genuinely.
Yeah.
And we wanted to do something together. And so we were trying to kind of figure that out. So he did come up with the name.
Okay.
Which is just phenomenal.
Yeah,
so
that's great.
The other thing I'll say about it is that each of us has kind of our niche that we like talking about. And you hear it in our examples. So Father Gregory is, an incredible Thomist. I'm sort of current events and spiritual reflection. Father Joseph Anthony is sports and development.
Wow.
And Father Bonaventure is philosophy.
Nerd.
He's unstoppable. No, the comments are great. When you go to our YouTube channel, you see people, sounding the alarm, like, "Hey, it's an episode with Father Bonaventure." You know, I would say he has the most dedicated fans.
Okay, it's might not be as viral because it's philosophy, but it's a solid core base that he's got.
Yeah, like for example, on a recent episode that we filmed, he was talking about whether or not Descartes was a Catholic philosopher.
And what was his conclusion?
You'll have to listen to the episode.
Ah, dang it. Yeah, I guess so.
but I think people, his crew, they're going to jump on that. They're going to.
Yeah, totally. No,
they're going to have thoughts.
I'm curious because my twin brother wrote his thesis on Descartes. So, anyways, I'll have to listen to that episode. That'd be great. Well, it makes sense. I feel like for you being someone who speaks about current events, because you were saying in college, politics and religion was something you were simultaneously interested in speaking about. Do you think that's kind of how that was just kind of a natural track for you to be able to speak into current political events and more of the newsy stuff?
Yeah, I think so. And I was always told that I had a good style in terms of presentation. So in college, I had a radio show, and was actually the manager. I know this is like so embarrassing. I was the manager of a campus radio station. I feel like I should go to confession for that. Like that.
You don't put that on your resume.
No,
anymore.
like that's something that makes me laugh now. But but at the time it was really fun, and it turns out it was actually good, a good training. In some ways, for what my life has become. Totally. So I entered media and entered the media landscape from an instruction from my provincial.
Okay.
So I've begun writing for Aletheia, which is a fantastic site. I hope people read it regularly. And through my work there, which was just as kind of a theological advisor, a young priest in the trenches, and what I didn't realize is that my colleagues at Aletheia were training me in how to work in communications.
Yeah.
So
you didn't know that though?
So no, I'm not paying any attention to that. I was just learning along the way. I thought, this is really fun, and I made real.
And they're just in the corner like protege.
I made real contributions, and they taught me great lessons, and I learned a lot from them. So in the 5 years that I worked with Aletheia, the last year I was the editor-in-chief of the English edition, overseeing all of its day-to-day operations with a number of direct reports. It was a really great moment and a fantastic team.
Yeah.
And then our Sunday visitor, after the U.S. bishops announced the closure of Catholic News Service's domestic operations, our Sunday visitor proposed to launch its news service, OSV News.
Yeah.
So I received an invitation to join their team and supervise directly the newspaper, which we transformed into a magazine, which ran for a year before the company made a different decision there. And then I was assigned to Rome, basically concurrently. I had hopes of staying involved with the magazine project, but that's not how these things evolved.
Right.
And that gave way to a whole birth of experiences that were very surprising to me that I didn't anticipate, including being able to cover the funeral of Pope Francis and the election of Pope Leo from the Conclave in the spring of 25.
Yeah. What was that experience like? I mean, you hadn't had anything in your past experience of doing like live papal coverage. So.
No, it was unbelievable. For me, it was a massive privilege because there was so much to celebrate from Pope Francis' papacy, and in terms of how the church had developed and how global events had progressed, it was clear that whatever was going to come next when the cardinals elected Pope Leo, that this man would face a number of great opportunities and challenges. So we watched with great anticipation. I mean, Pope Francis made some very beautiful decisions. His decision to be buried in Santa Maria Maggiore was extraordinary. And what I appreciated most about that was the funerary procession, which was such a remarkable thing through the streets of Rome. I mean, the visuals for that was so profound.
Right.
The whole world was watching, and just the timing, the fact that we had the funeral the day that was supposed to have been the canonization, right? So we had all these young people ready in Rome that were able to celebrate him more in the late pontiff. These things were genuinely very beautiful.
Yeah.
And then, of course, to be standing there on the arm of St. Peter's Basilica with all of our media colleagues when the first American pontiff was elected.
Amazing.
We should precise it a little bit, I suppose, and say the first pontiff born in the United States was elected.
Right.
Because people say Pope Francis the first. Okay, fine. I have my U.S. view. I gotta precise that. But it was an extraordinary thing. In that moment when his name was announced, when he was first introduced to us by Cardinal Mamberti, I heard it clearly and I understood it. Which some people say, oh, I wasn't sure what the name was. Okay.
Yeah.
No, I heard it clearly and I understood it. I just didn't believe it. So I turned to my Polish colleague, Paulina Kusik, and I said, who? And she said, it's the American. And so that became a number of great, that became the first of another great exchanges with Paulina about what it's like to have a pope from your home country.
Right.
Because for her, she's still thinking and loving John Paul II.
Totally. With the so you were covering that with OSV at that time.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. With Alatea, were you doing news? Because Alatea, I feel like they do a lot. They do cultural pieces. They're pretty broad in their focus.
A lot of Catholic lifestyle. But I did learn how to cover the Vatican from Alatea.
Okay.
So there are a number of great Vatican correspondents, and they work closely with a partner agency, Eyewitness, which is still based here in Rome, a French agency. So I learned a lot about the shape of Catholic media and how things are actually covered,
right? How
the Vatican itself works through those organizations.
Right, seeing the umbrella, how the sausage is made. I'm getting that here at Rome Reports too.
Yeah, hot dog. I prefer to say hot dog now. We can talk about Chicago, how the hot dog is
so
made.
Correct, yeah. That's amazing. With the, well, it's interesting now because we have a lot of, with the American Pope comes because you even said, not the first American Pope, the first Pope to be born in America sort of thing where it's the universality of it. It's amazing that he's a U.S. Pope, but then there's also the danger of like the political side coming in with the state of Catholic media today, again, even just in the Twitter world, and with the rise of like modern media, which the Dominican friars are spearheading in a lot of ways as a religious order. The state of Catholic media today, what do you think is the role for faithfully expressing the true teachings of the church, but also not being just, like a Vatican spokesperson? Because, there are problems in the church, but there's also, you want to actually express the teachings and the words of the Pope even with accuracy as well. What have been some of the struggles in your years in media trying to strike that balance between, there's problems in the church, whether it's something like the sex abuse crises, or there's the liturgy wars or whatever have you, but also being with the Pope and being truly obedient to him in a proper way. What have been some lessons that you've had? Do you have like particular stories?
Well, this is going to be a great 5-hour lecture. So
all right.
Sit back while I tell you all of my opinion. No, I think so. For example, one of my first experiences of this was the COVID-19 crisis, because we got real and very grave conversations around Catholic moral theology, which did have objective answers. So for a lot of people, we had the questions about vaccination, right?
Right.
And the morality of vaccination, and there are real answers that the church has to give about that question, and presenting that in a way such that people could receive it, such that all the facts could be spoken and known, could be heard in a context that wasn't political. That was extremely challenging, because immediately people wanted to presume a political view on what was not a political question, actually. So that was an extraordinary lesson. There were many other lessons from COVID-19. I think, for example, we regret not having had more information about the disease, because the question of church closing now looks so different, and the wound from that is so great in the faithful, and that is not going to go away. This happened just after Cardinal Pizzaballa was not permitted by Israeli police to enter the Holy Sepulchre on Palm Sunday. Some of the responses that people had on social media were, why is this guy even upset about it? Remember when he closed churches and locked us all down during the COVID-19 pandemic? It's like, okay. This is a very live wound. People are still processing their approach to faith through the crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, that's not what we're talking about right now.
Right.
So you have for me, of course, the COVID pandemic and the experience of the radical fracture in trust in media that came through the COVID pandemic, all the moral questions that were a part of it. That was extremely formative, and was a very important moment. I would say also, you were asking a little bit about what are we supposed to do in the midst of this. I think we have our mandate from Pope Leo, who understands the church in the United States better than any pope. Yeah. Better than any pope. First of all, St. Peter didn't know about the United States. So it's not an attack on St. Peter. Yeah. But the reality of his life experience is such that he has a better sense of where we are in the American church, and it means that we can take his words more seriously. Right. And that's not a dunk on Pope Francis. It's just to say that it's obvious that there was a communication vacuum, that Pope Francis could not talk to and be heard by the people of the United States. The people of the United States could not talk to and be heard by Pope Francis. Right. It just didn't work. Yeah. And what we can say with Pope Leo is no one can argue that point. Yep. Yeah. Because he gets us and he can speak to us. What it does insist on, though, is that we have to listen to him. Yeah. Because when he challenges us, he does so understanding very well the context of our country. So I hope that we in Catholic media will take that very seriously, because there's an invitation from Pope Leo in his mandate to be men and women who are working for unity and who are working for charity within the church. This was how he explained the role of Peter during his homily and his inauguration, right? He gave us these two pillars, unity and charity. He said that's the mission of Peter. Yeah. And Catholic media, as an extension of Peter's mission, I think shares that mission.
How would, let's say, things blow up and people are throwing, it could be Catholic teaching around or not. What does the church teach on these things, and what does it not teach on something, in a particular case, all the drama around U.S. immigration right now?
Right. I think the important key is going to be able to follow clearly the bishops of our country who are going to help us mediate the directives of the Holy Father on this point. We are going to be challenged by it, because there is a view of the church that Pope Leo has lived and is going to be teaching us, which is to welcome people in their need. So when he was a bishop in Peru, there was an immigration crisis, and he met people on the front lines of Peru, welcoming them in, serving their material and humanitarian needs. We could take that as a direct understanding. Okay, here's what the Holy Father thinks about this. Right. This is how he's lived it in his priesthood and as a bishop. And we can understand that our call then is to welcome immigrants as radically as we possibly can. That's what he did. Now, what does that mean prudentially, however? So it's one thing to say we want to be radical in the love that we're showing, in meeting the humanitarian need that arrives on our border. It's another thing to say, what do we advocate for in policy? And that's where there can be prudent debate, and where there's going to be legitimate difference, and where there's not going to be something necessarily objective in terms of the middle of the discourse from Catholic moral teaching.
Yeah.
There are going to be some things that are objective, and then there are others that are going to be prudential.
Right.
And what we have to do, and this is the point, is have that conversation fairly. So when married people are beginning their vocation, right, one of the things they learn is that they learn to fight fairly. It's not that there's going to be no fight in your marriage, right? But if there's to be a fight, it has to be a good one, and it has to be a fair fight. And that's what our political discourse needs, a good fight and a fair fight. And by that, I mean reasoned discourse about the nature of immigration reform, which is an obvious need that everyone can agree on in the United States.
And that's where it's hard, because so many people would, in principle, agree. And like, yes, we're supposed to welcome the stranger. But I think then the extreme arguments are always used then too, where it's like, people who would be more soft immigration get thrown like, oh, well, what about the woman and girl is being raped by... So they'll make those claims. There's those things that are happening. There are terrible things that are happening. But then you also have, all the terrible things that might be happening to someone on the border, where it's, a pregnant mother and she's actually fleeing danger and she needs asylum. But it's hard to meet in the middle on those questions as well. So I think for a lot of people, it is easier just to slip into one side of it as well, but that is the challenge, and there's no easy answer, it seems, to something like that either. But it could be that, if Pope Leo decided anything, it's like meeting with people on all sides of these questions too.
Absolutely. And I think we're going to see again the continued reaction of the Catholic Church, which is you have to meet the actual need, and you have to serve the real people who are hurting in front of you. That's just what the gospel calls for.
Right.
And then apart from that, then you have a kind of second wave where we debate policy and enact laws that are just and that serve those who are most in need. And that's another but separate conversation. And I think sometimes in the discourse in the United States, those two realities are conflated.
Yeah.
Where, and I'm thinking of Catholic agencies that are serving immigrants on the U.S. border, where they're attacked for their right to do so. And we have to vocally and vigorously defend this outreach because they're serving people who are really in need.
Right.
And then apart from where we think about policy, then again, like we said, we have to find ways to have a reasoned and fair conversation.
Yeah. And even with media too, the lack of trust, like you're saying, after COVID, even something like the USCCB, where they're speaking out against this, but even people just have such a lack of institutional trust as well, where it's like, okay, well, I don't know. I feel like generally I would get it where most people would kind of roll their eyes, like, oh, the USCCB, we do
there's
the
data on this.
Yeah, but
the Catholic Project at Catholic University of America has numbers on this. Yeah, it's very interesting. When people say, basically it's the same thing as when people talk about the U.S. Congress. Like, do people trust Congress? No.
Right.
And then you ask them, do you trust your representative? And the numbers get better because you think, oh, my congressman, my congresswoman,
he at least probably knows
that person represents
problems.
me, and has a better sense. Or maybe I know him or her directly, or maybe I know someone who works for he or she. Okay. So as soon as the reality gets more concrete, you get a growth of trust. Same thing is true for the U.S. bishops.
Okay.
As a whole, Catholics in the United States are less inclined to trust the U.S. bishops as an entity than they are their bishop.
Right.
Which is good.
Yeah. We
want people to trust their bishop.
Right.
Because the conference is not their bishop.
Right.
Their bishop is their bishop.
Yeah.
But it's a very interesting reality because, as you say, it corresponds with so much of the breakdown of our social coherence, where we've just experienced massive institutional failure, or growth in institutional distrust, some of which is merited and other of which is not, and it begs this question. But it does mean, and here for anyone who is a decision maker who might hear, for Pete's sake, today, this is my call to action for you. It does mean that every bishop needs to get in front of his people because the people of a particular diocese are looking to hear not from the U.S. bishops. They want to hear from their shepherd.
Right. I think a part of going into the podcast space, I know we're on a podcast now, but that's probably why you see a
Is
rise.
that what we're doing? Man,
Yeah.
I just had to, I just
had a Truman Show
man,
moment.
yeah.
Like,
Wow,
wait,
it's all it's all a recording.
Yeah. But you have this, the podcast trend now because it's one particular person, it's a face that you feel like you know, where it's not like the Wall Street Journal or, the New York Times. You might like Ross Douthat or something like that. But for the most part, I think that's why you see this trend towards podcasts.
Right.
It feels more personal. You feel like you just sat down with
Joe Rogan.
Joe Rogan for 3 hours and he's just kind of talking like you're bros or something. But you have this move away from institutions as well, towards the podcast culture, and just particular individuals as well. One topic that's a part of all this too, and this is something the USACB also spoke out about, besides U.S. immigration, is anti-Semitism and everything that's going on right now. Because, of course, most people are familiar with the Religious Freedom Commission and everything that happened with Carrie Prejean Baller as well. But I think, again, there's so much noise around it. Yeah, everything we're talking about where it becomes extreme, generalized claims about things. But people miss what the church is actually teaching on these things, or what it isn't teaching on these. With something like anti-Semitism, and most people, it might not be anti-Semitism. They're worried at what they're seeing, what's going on in Israel or Zionism, all those claims. How should a Catholic navigate something like this? What does the church actually teach about our relationship with the Jewish people, like something like Israel as well? There's so many avenues you can take on that, but we'll focus specifically on, I think, the Carrie Prejean Baller case, something like that. Where should a Catholic follow in that case?
Yeah, so in summary, because there's much that could be said about it, for those who don't know, Carrie Prejean Baller was dismissed from the Presidential Religious Liberty Commission. She was dismissed for her behavior on the commission, and some of that has remained private, so it's not entirely clear, but those procedures were followed according to the norms and terms of the commission. Okay. Then you have Carrie's view, where she says she was dismissed from the commission for being a Catholic.
Yeah.
That can't be the case, since Timothy Cardinal Dolan and Bishop Robert Barron of Winona Rochester
and Ryan Anderson too.
Yeah, exactly, are on this commission, right? And these are Catholics in good standing. I'll have to text Ryan and see if he's still in good standing, but I'm pretty sure he is. You done anything? You done anything today? No, but right. These are Catholics in good standing. They remain on the commission. So she clearly was not dismissed for her Catholic views, although she is telling everyone that this is the case.
Yeah.
One thing that I would point out, in addition to this divergent view of what happened there between what actually happened and what she's reporting, one thing I would point out is that there are, again, just as I was saying with immigration, I think there are kind of two fronts, right? Our response in serving the people, the real people that arrive with needs, and how we handle policy. I think there's two fronts here in what Carrie has presented in terms of the church's response to conversations around Judaism right now. So one pillar is, the base level. What's never acceptable is any form of anti-Semitism. This is very clear. The U.S. bishops produce a beautiful guiding document about this. For Catholics, it's never acceptable. We just have to be absolutely very clear on it. Just like we say, when someone arrives at my door with real humanitarian needs, I meet it, because that's what the gospel says to do. Now, the further question that introduces more nuance, where prudential determinations need to be made, is questions surrounding Zionism and what Zionism means. Right. So for the Catholic Church, Zionism can't be equating the modern nation state of Israel, which is one thing, with biblical Israel.
Right.
Those are not the same thing in the understanding of the church. Okay, that spiritually this nation is not the same from the biblical tradition. Okay, and why is that so important? Because it means that there are places where we can be in debate about where the nation of Israel has and hasn't lived up to Christian expectations. And we can be clear as countries like the United States, our own nation, our own homeland, and that is a very close relation, very important relationship with Israel. The United States has the right to be clear about those shortcomings and to challenge it, just like Israel has the right to challenge the United States when the United States falls short of its goals. Right. So I think we have to distinguish these two questions because on the ground level we have anti-Semitism, which is never tolerable, which we always need to denounce very clearly, and then we have the question of Zionism, which requires a little bit more prudence and a little bit more formation to understand how to approach that question as Catholics.
Mm-hmm. I think with even trying to weave and understand what the church teaches in prudential matters on something like anti-Semitism, Zionism, is, I think, people don't even know something like Nostra Aetate or what the church has said on these things in recent years. These topics are being blown up, and they're part of like mainstream conversations right now. And people get upset, and it's like, well, you don't even know what the church is teaching on this exactly.
And it turns out it's very nuanced.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, we take the historical question: who killed Jesus? Because you have all these podcasters now that want to talk about how the Jews are guilty of blood libel because they're the ones who killed Christ. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's only partly true from the text of the Gospels itself, right? Because Roman authorities carried out the crucifixion. Mm-hmm. Okay, but then you have the reality of the fact that Christ died for my sins, which means I killed him. Yeah. Or the beautiful theological interpretation Pope Benedict gives, which is that when the Jewish people cry out, his blood be on us and on our children, they're actually calling down a blessing. Mm-hmm. They don't know it this way, right? Or understand it this way, right? Because it's the redemptive, the saving blood of Jesus Christ, which was shed for all of humanity.
I actually have that quote right here.
Nice, excellent.
It's from Jesus of Nazareth. It goes, "The Christian will remember that Jesus' blood speaks a different language from the blood of Abel. It does not cry out for vengeance and punishment. It brings reconciliation. It is not poured out against anyone. It is poured out for many, for all. Read in the light of faith, these words are not a curse, but rather redemption, salvation." Very powerful,
Fantastic quote. Good for you. Nice. Well done. Yeah, A+.
Well, I was listening to your segments on this too, and Benedict. I mean, that's such a powerful quote too. Even it's like, if you actually believe in the blood of Christ, like the salvific power of the blood of Christ, then that has so many implications beyond even our simplified understanding as well.
But why does that idea come back up, James? It comes up because people think that they're expressing something traditional from a traditional Catholic mindset. And what they're actually expressing is something flawed that needed correction, that we need to come to a fuller understanding of. Right. And that's why Nostra Aetate, the document from the Second Vatican Council that you're talking about, helps us to see more clearly how we should understand the fulfillment of the Old Covenant in the New, and what it means for our relationship to the Old Covenant. So I think it's okay, and this makes Catholics uncomfortable. You know, don't squirm in your chair over there, but it makes Catholics uncomfortable when we say, well, the Church has to apologize for past actions. Or when
start squirming,
or when we have to say, well, that actually required a deeper understanding of our tradition, in order to come to fully understand the truth, and that's what the work of theology is doing. And it doesn't mean that tradition has changed or that the fundamental traditions. No. Jesus established only one church. He established it in the name of the salvation of the world. The head of that church is the Pope. He's the successor of St. Peter. It doesn't countermand any of those fundamental claims. Yep. But it does help us to embrace them more completely. The continued working out of theology. St. John Henry Newman helped us to understand this in his concept of the development of doctrine, which doesn't mean doctrine is progressing. It means we're understanding more completely that which was already given.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Well, even again with all these questions, whether it's immigration, COVID, anti-Semitism, Zionism, it's you in college, politics and faith, and you realize one is more important than the other. And like returning to that, where I think as Catholics, like we're called to be saints. So you can be talking all about all this stuff and making these claims, but if you're not receiving the sacraments, if you're not going to confession, these kinds of things, like, well, you're missing the elemental, the most important point as well.
Somebody much wiser than I had something to say about two cities. And
Yeah.
I would follow his saintly advice.
Yeah, St. Augustine, pray for us. Father, to close out, we do a rapid fire round of questions. 5 questions.
Fantastic.
So
Macaroni and cheese.
Yeah.
The Indianapolis Colts. Okay, sorry.
I'm sure
ahead.
you can slip those in
Yeah.
somehow. Yeah. But thank you for joining the podcast, and we'll close out with this quick rapid fire round. All right. First one is favorite pope of all time.
Pius V.
All right. Dominican. Yeah. All right.
Extraordinary reformer.
Amen. Who is an underrated saint?
Saint Dominic. I know, I'm on brand here. You know?
Yeah. Come on. Can you throw a monkey wrench in here? Favorite fact about the Vatican that you're allowed to tell me?
Oh, Michelangelo didn't actually design the uniform the Swiss Guard wears.
Ooh. Who did?
I don't remember.
All right.
I learned that along the way. It wasn't him, though. Everyone thinks it's him.
Yeah. We'll find out. Do you think we would have Christ's incarnation without the fall of Adam and Eve?
Oh, I take the Thomist route on this one.
Yeah. It's not the
Not gonna
Franciscan
give it
route.
No way.
And that is? What is the Thomistic route?
Absolutely not.
All right.
What are you people talking
All
about?
right.
Crazy.
Finish this sentence. For Pete's sake, I wish people would.
Pray.
Amen. Thanks for joining, Father.
My joy.